What does this clay tablet have to do with God's heart? Well, that clay tablet is something called the Babylonian Chronicle. It lives in the British Museum these days, and it outlines an ancient royal idiom that we actually find in our Bibles.
The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler over his people, and that man is David. But this phrase is an oft misunderstood and even more frequently misapplied title. See, what we're going to find is that David is a far more successful king than Saul. And his lineage and line does continue past him, in some sense even eternally, in the reign of Jesus, as Matthew points out. But that does not mean that David as king is somehow absolved of critical investigation. Far too often I have heard any critique of David followed up with, yeah, but he was a man after God's heart, so who are you to judge him? What that misses is that this phrase isn't actually a description of David at all. It's a title that's bestowed on David. And I'll quote Colin Toffelmeyer here. He's an Old Testament scholar and a prof at Ambrose University here in the city. But he says, since folks seem hell-bent on trotting out King David whenever a Christian acts monstrously, I'll take this opportunity to remind everyone that man after God's heart is a Hebrew phrase that refers to David's election as king. It is not related to his character or to God's approval of him. And what he's talking about here is that in ancient Semitic cultures, this was a royal idiom. For example, we have something called the East India House Inscription of Nebuchadnezzar II. And it's an ancient Akkadian clay tablet that names the new king, and it reads, I, his eldest son, the chosen of his own heart. Another example is another tablet called the Babylonian Chronicle. It outlines the Babylonians replacing Jehoiakim with a king of their choosing after they conquer Israel in 598 BC. And it tells us that the Babylonian regent appointed there a king after his own heart. What this means is that when Samuel uses the phrase, a man after his own heart, it isn't a description of David's character. It's a title that names David as the king in waiting. In other words, David has been chosen after God's wishes. It's probably a better translation, or because of God's desires. It's a statement about divine selection, not about personal character. Now, we can talk about why God chose David, and that's an interesting discussion, and we will certainly explore that in this series. Because David is far from a perfect king, but he is a fascinating character. But this verse here is not about that. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card whenever David messes up, and it is absolutely not a way for Christian leaders to avoid accountability. That is bad theology and biblical illiteracy all rolled up into one toxic ball.